The truth isn't always comfortable or convenient. Sometimes it's downright painful, but it's the only solid foundation on which to build anything meant to last. Whether it's a marriage, a career, or a relationship between father and son, my house had been transferred to Frank's name overnight. As I struggled to comprehend this betrayal, the doctor delivered another blow. My bank accounts had been completely emptied. What do you think? Would you have done the same in my position? Exposed a painful truth publicly to protect someone you love? I hope you never face such a difficult choice. But if you do, remember that real love sometimes means choosing truth over comfort. Comment below with your thoughts. Like this video if you found value in our story. Subscribe for more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need to hear that truth, even when painful, is an act of love. Throughout those dark months, our only daughter Stephanie was our rock, driving her mother to chemotherapy appointments and staying overnight at the hospital when I was too exhausted to keep vigil alone. Stephanie had married Frank 5 years earlier in a modest ceremony at the local country club. I had my reservations about him from the beginning. There was something calculated about his charm, something that never quite reached his eyes when he smiled. But Stephanie was clearly in love, and after losing her mother, I couldn't bear to create any distance between us by voicing my concerns. Martha had always been better at reading people than me anyway. Maybe I was just being an overprotective father. After selling my business, I was in a comfortable financial position. The house was fully paid off and worth around $850,000 in our desirable suburb. My retirement accounts and investments totaled approximately $750,000. Not wealthy by any measure, but enough to ensure I would never be a burden to my daughter and could leave her a decent inheritance someday. The first few months after Martha's passing were a fog. I rattled around in our family home, surrounded by memories but feeling utterly alone. Stephanie and Frank visited regularly, usually for Sunday dinners. Frank would often bring expensive bottles of whiskey, insisting we toast to Martha's memory. Initially, I appreciated the gesture, though I was never much of a drinker. About 6 months ago, Frank began showing an unusual interest in my financial affairs. It started subtly, with casual questions about my retirement plans or comments about rising property taxes in the neighborhood. One evening in April, Frank broached the subject directly. We had just finished dinner when Frank said, "I hope you don't mind me asking, Miller, but have you updated your estate plans since Martha passed?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I admitted. It had been on my list of things to do, but the thought of sitting in a lawyer's office discussing what would happen after my death was too depressing to face. Frank nodded sympathetically. "I completely understand. But you should at least add Stephanie to your bank accounts, just in case something happens. You know, so she can pay your bills if you get sick." It made sense, and I agreed. The following week, Frank drove me to the bank, where I added Stephanie as a joint account holder on my checking and savings accounts. What I didn't realize was that Frank had manipulated the situation. Stephanie later told me she thought I was just granting her limited access for emergencies, not full ownership rights. The warning signs continued over the following months. Frank began suggesting I sell my house and move into a retirement community. When I firmly declined, he pivoted to recommending various home renovations that would miraculously increase my property value. Each suggestion conveniently required significant withdrawals from my savings. 2 weeks ago, Frank insisted on hosting a special dinner at my house. He arrived early, grocery bags in hand, waving away my offers of help. I remember thinking it was strange that he asked me to stay out of the kitchen entirely while he prepared the meal. He even poured my pre-dinner drink, something he had never done before. The food was surprisingly good, though Frank seemed anxious, constantly checking his watch. After dinner, he brought me a glass of water with my usual evening medications. There was something off about his expression as he said, "Just rest, old man. We'll clean up everything." My vision began to blur almost immediately. I remember struggling to stand, knocking over my water glass as I fought against the overwhelming drowsiness. The last thing I recall is Frank's face hovering over me, no longer bothering to mask his contempt as darkness closed in. I later learned through hospital records that paramedics had been called to my home for a suspected heart attack. But the toxicology report told a different story. My system contained over 10 times the normal dose of my prescribed sleep medication, enough to be potentially fatal for someone my age. While investigating my bank records, my lawyer discovered something else I hadn't known. Frank had been secretly drowning in gambling debts for years, owing over $300,000 to various casinos and loan sharks. No wonder he had been so desperate to get his hands on my assets. The man who had married my daughter was nothing more than a calculating predator, and I had invited him right into my life. 3 days after waking up in the hospital, I was finally discharged. Still weak and unsteady on my feet, I collected the few possessions I had with me. My wallet, cell phone, and a change of clothes Stephanie had dropped off without actually visiting me. The hospital staff seemed concerned about my living situation, but I assured them I was going home. At that point, I still hadn't fully accepted what had happened. I used the hospital courtesy phone to call a taxi, as my cell phone battery had died. The 20-minute ride to my neighborhood of 30 years was spent in silence, my mind racing with questions and fears. As we turned onto my street, the driver let out a low whistle. "Looks like somebody's having one heck of a yard sale," he commented. I looked up to see a nightmare unfolding before my eyes. My personal belongings were strewn across the front lawn. Furniture, clothes, photo albums, and boxes of Martha's carefully preserved memories scattered like garbage. A small group of neighbors had gathered, watching in confusion. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I paid the driver and stepped out on wobbling legs. Bill Turner, my neighbor of 20 years, rushed over to help me. "Miller, what on earth is happening? Your son-in-law said you were moving to a retirement home, but this doesn't look right." Before I could answer, the front door opened, and Frank stepped out onto the porch. His usual, carefully maintained friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by cold determination. "You need to leave, Miller. This is private property now," he called out. I straightened my back, ignoring the pain and dizziness. "This is my house, Frank. What have you done?" Frank pulled out his cell phone. "I'm calling the police if you don't leave immediately. You're trespassing." I thought he was bluffing. But 20 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. Officer Jenkins was young, probably in his late 20s, while his partner, Officer Ramirez, was older, closer to my age. They approached with caution. "Sir, we received a complaint about trespassing," Officer Jenkins began. "This is my house," I interrupted, my voice breaking. "I've lived here for 30 years. This man is my son-in-law. He somehow transferred the deed while I was unconscious in the hospital." The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Frank produced a folder of documents, showing them with confident authority. "I have all the paperwork right here, officers. Legal transfer of property, signed and notarized 3 days ago. Miller agreed to sell me the house below market value because of his medical issues. Now he's confused and trying to back out of our agreement." I was shaking with rage and disbelief. "That's a lie! I was drugged. He poisoned me." Officer Ramirez looked at me with sympathy but shook his head slightly. "Sir, these appear to be legal documents. If you dispute their validity, you'll need to take that up in civil court. We can't determine property rights in a situation like this." Just then, Stephanie's car pulled into the driveway. I felt a surge of relief. Surely my daughter would stand by me, tell the officers the truth. She approached slowly, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes couldn't meet mine. "Dad," Frank's signature looks around the lawn. "Why are you doing this? We talked about this. You agreed to sign over the house after your hospital scare." I stared at my daughter in disbelief. "Stephanie, I never agreed to anything. I was drugged. Frank put something in my food." The hospital confirmed it. Frank put his arm around Stephanie's shoulders. She pulled away slightly, but didn't fully reject his touch. The officers watched our family drama unfold with increasing discomfort. With trembling hands, I asked to see the documents. Officer Jenkins handed them to me, and I immediately recognized the signature as a forgery. It was close, but certain letters slanted wrong. Having signed countless contracts during my construction days, I knew my own signature intimately. "This isn't my signature," I insisted. "This is forgery." Frank laughed dismissively. "Of course you'd say that now. Stephanie, tell them how your father has been forgetting things lately." The doctors said confusion might be a side effect of his medication. My own daughter looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. You told us you wanted to simplify your life after the heart scare." "There was no heart attack," I said through clenched teeth. The hospital confirmed I was drugged with sleeping pills. 10 times my normal dose. Call them if you don't believe me. Officer Ramirez pulled his partner aside for a brief conversation, then approached me. Sir, this appears to be a civil matter. The documentation shows a legal transfer of property. If you believe these documents were obtained fraudulently, you'll need to contest that through proper legal channels. For now, this residence legally belongs to Mr. Harrington. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you're telling me that someone can drug me, forge my signature, steal my home, and there's nothing you can do? The officer sighed heavily. I understand your frustration, sir, but property disputes aren't handled by police. We can only enforce the legal documentation as it currently stands. I suggest you contact a lawyer immediately. I had no choice but to gather what I could carry. Some clothes, my passport, and a few irreplaceable photos of Martha. Everything else would have to wait. Frank watched with a smug expression as I filled 2 suitcases with whatever I could salvage from my life. As I prepared to leave, Bill approached again. You can stay with us tonight, Miller. I appreciated his offer but couldn't bear the humiliation. Instead, I called another taxi and checked into a budget motel on the edge of town, paying with an emergency credit card Frank didn't know about. Sitting on the edge of the sagging mattress, I finally allowed myself to break down. How had I been so blind? How could my own daughter participate in this betrayal? The following morning, I visited an ATM to withdraw emergency cash, only to discover that every account had been emptied to the last penny. $750,000 of my life savings, gone. I sat in my rental car, trying to control my breathing as panic threatened to overwhelm me. Later that day, I made a desperate call to Stephanie from the motel phone. To my surprise, she answered, sounding guarded. Dad, I can't talk long. Frank would be upset. Stephanie, please listen to me. I never agreed to sell the house. I never signed those papers. You have to believe me. There was a long pause. Then, in a hushed voice, she said, Frank told me you were planning to change your will. He said you were going to cut me out because you two had been arguing about his business proposal. He showed me emails. What emails? I never sent any emails about changing my will. He showed me the messages, Dad. In your account, you wrote that you were disappointed in my choices and were planning to leave everything to your brother's kids instead. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. I don't have a brother, Stephanie. I'm an only child. Those emails were fake. The line went silent for several seconds. When Stephanie spoke again, her voice trembled. I have to go, Dad. Frank's coming. The call ended, but a seed of doubt had been planted. My daughter had been manipulated just as thoroughly as I had been. Frank's scheme went deeper than I had imagined. He hadn't just stolen my house and money. He had poisoned my relationship with my only child through elaborate lies. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of determination. If the system wouldn't help me, I would need to build my own support network. My first call was to Jack Thompson, a retired detective and longtime friend from my construction days. We had met 30 years ago when I built his family home, and he had helped me navigate some difficult contract disputes over the years. Jack, I need your help, I said after explaining the situation. My voice was steadier than it had been in days. This isn't just about getting my house back anymore. This is about protecting my daughter and making sure Frank never does this to anyone else. Jack didn't hesitate. Give me 2 hours to make some calls, and I'll meet you for lunch. Don't go back to that house alone, Miller. This guy sounds dangerous. After hanging up with Jack, I called Susan Peterson, a former client who had become one of the city's most respected attorneys. Her specialty was estate litigation, which seemed fitting given my situation. Her secretary initially said she was booked solid for 2 weeks, but when I mentioned Jack Thompson had referred me, Susan got on the line immediately. I'll squeeze you in at 2 o'clock today, Miller, she said after hearing a brief summary. Bring any documentation you have, even if it's just the hospital records. And Miller, don't contact your daughter or son-in-law again until we've talked. The pieces were starting to come together. For the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I felt a flicker of hope. Jack and I met at a quiet diner far from my neighborhood. He arrived with a notebook already filled with preliminary information. I've made some calls, he said without preamble. Your son-in-law has quite a history. He's never been convicted of anything major, but his name has come up in several fraud investigations across 3 states. He's careful, always staying just on the right side of criminal charges. My stomach twisted. And my daughter has no idea who she really married? Jack's expression darkened. From what I can tell, he's an expert manipulator. He targets vulnerable people, gains their trust, then exploits them financially. Your daughter wouldn't be the first person he's fooled. As we strategized, Jack's phone rang. He answered, listened briefly, then handed it to me. It was Dave Watson, my next-door neighbor. Miller, I'm not sure if this helps, but I installed security cameras last year after that string of break-ins. I checked the footage from the night you went to the hospital. I have clear video of Frank helping carry you to the ambulance. But here's the thing. He came back 3 hours later with 2 men I've never seen before. They were in your house until morning. My hands shook as I thanked Dave and promised to be in touch soon. When I relayed the information to Jack, he immediately called a contact at the police department to ensure the footage was preserved as evidence. Our next step was meeting with Susan at her downtown office. Her reputation for directness was well earned. Based on what you've told me, we have 3 separate legal issues, she explained. First, the attempted murder charge, which is criminal and will be handled by the district attorney if there's enough evidence. Second, the fraudulent property transfer, which we'll contest in civil court. Third, the theft of your financial assets, which could be either criminal or civil depending on how it was accomplished. She tapped her pen thoughtfully against her legal pad. The biggest challenge is proving the forgery without original documents. We need more evidence. As if on cue, Jack's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it and grinned. The hospital just confirmed they're willing to provide expert testimony about the drug levels in your system. They're calling it a clear case of intentional overdose. Susan nodded approvingly. That helps with the criminal case. Now we need to focus on the property fraud. For the next 2 hours, we developed a comprehensive strategy. Susan would file emergency motions to freeze any attempts to sell or further mortgage my property. Jack would leverage his police contacts to expedite the fraud investigation, and I would focus on gathering additional evidence and trying to reconnect with Stephanie, away from Frank's influence. As I was leaving Susan's office, her receptionist handed me a message slip. Bill Turner had called, saying someone named Troy Parker was trying to reach me urgently. The name wasn't familiar, but I called the number from Susan's office. Mr. Miller? Troy's voice was tense. You don't know me, but I used to be Frank Harrington's business partner in Arizona. I heard through mutual connections that he might have pulled one of his schemes on you. My heart raced. You know about his cons? Troy laughed bitterly. Know about them? I was his first victim. We started a real estate company together 6 years ago. Within 8 months, he had transferred all our properties to his name and left me with the debts. By the time I figured out what happened, he had moved to your state and changed his phone number. Can you prove any of this? I asked, trying to contain my excitement. I have documentation of everything, Troy replied. And I'm not the only one. There are at least 4 other former partners or investors he's defrauded. We've been tracking him, building a case. Your situation might be what finally brings him down. By the time I met back up with Jack to share this breakthrough, he had news of his own. Frank Harrington isn't even his real name, he revealed. It's Frank Harrison. And here's the kicker. Miller. He's still legally married to a woman in California. The marriage to your daughter isn't valid. I sat back, stunned. Stephanie isn't legally his wife? Jack shook his head. The divorce from his first wife was never finalized. He abandoned her with massive debts, just like his business partners. The information hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Frank stolen my home and savings, but his entire relationship with my daughter was built on lies. Stephanie wasn't just a victim of his recent manipulation. She had been deceived from the very beginning. As painful as these revelations were, each one strengthened our case. By the end of that first week, we had assembled an impressive amount of evidence. Hospital toxicology reports confirming deliberate overdose, security footage showing Frank's suspicious activities the night I was hospitalized, testimonials from previous victims, proof of his false identity, and documentation of his history of financial fraud. Susan filed our initial legal motions, requesting an emergency injunction to prevent any sale or further encumbrance of my property. The district attorney's office opened an investigation into the drugging incident, treating it as attempted murder rather than mere assault. For the first time since waking up in that hospital room, I began to believe that justice might actually be possible. Frank had chosen the wrong old man to victimize. He thought I was alone and helpless, but he never expected I would bring such formidable allies back with me. With our legal strategy in motion, Jack suggested we apply pressure from multiple angles. A predator like Frank, he explained, is most dangerous when cornered, but also most likely to make mistakes. Our first move was subtle, but effective. Jack enlisted 2 former colleagues to conduct surveillance on Frank, documenting his daily movements and activities. Within 3 days, they had photographed him visiting high-stakes gambling establishments, meeting with known loan sharks, and engaging in what appeared to be drug transactions. Meanwhile, Susan's paralegal discovered that Frank had already taken out a sizable second mortgage on my house, roughly $400,000. The funds had been wired to an offshore account, making them difficult, but not impossible to trace. "Time to turn up the heat," Jack said during our morning strategy meeting at Susan's office. "With your permission, I'd like to make some anonymous calls." I trusted Jack implicitly. "Do whatever you think is necessary." Meanwhile, Susan's paralegal discovered that Frank had already taken out a sizable second mortgage on my house, roughly $400,000. The funds had been wired to an offshore account, making them difficult, but not impossible to trace. For the first time since waking up in that hospital room, I began to believe that justice might actually be possible. Frank had chosen the wrong old man to victimize. He thought I was alone and helpless, but he never expected I would bring such formidable allies back with me. Jack made 3 calls that day. The first was to the gambling establishments where Frank had been photographed, informing them that Mr. Harrington had recently come into significant assets that could satisfy his outstanding debts. The second was to his known creditors, several of whom had been looking for Frank under his previous name. The third was to the mortgage company, alerting them to potential fraud in the recent loan application. I arrived during her lunch break and waited nervously in the small courtyard outside her building. When she emerged, she looked thin and tired, dark circles under her eyes. For a moment I feared she would turn around and flee, but instead she cautiously approached my bench. Now came the most difficult part of our plan, reaching Stephanie. I couldn't risk approaching the house again, and her cell phone seemed to be constantly monitored by Frank. After careful consideration, we decided I would attempt to meet her at her workplace, a small accounting firm downtown where she had been employed for 8 years. "I'm not here to cause problems, Stephanie," I said gently. "I just want to show you something." "Dad," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "I'm not supposed to talk to you." I handed her a thin file containing irrefutable evidence of Frank's true identity, his previous marriage, and statements from his former business partners describing his fraud patterns. Her hands trembled as she scanned the documents. "Stephanie," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "I never sent those emails about changing my will. I don't have a brother, so I couldn't possibly have nieces or nephews to leave my estate to. Those messages were fabricated." She looked up sharply, her expression shifting from confusion to the beginning of horrified realization. "But I saw them. On your computer, which disappeared after I went to the hospital, correct? Think about it, Stephanie. If I really wanted to cut you out of my will, why would I tell Frank about it first? And why would I suddenly decide to sell my home for a fraction of its value right after being hospitalized?" Tears filled her eyes. "Dad, I don't know what to believe anymore. Frank's been so different lately. Angry, secretive, he barely sleeps. I wanted to pull my daughter into my arms, to protect her as I had when she was small, but I restrained myself. She needed to come to the truth on her own terms. "I'm staying at the Westview Motel, room 114, I told her. "When you're ready to talk more, I'll be there, day or night. And Stephanie, be careful. Don't confront him alone." As she returned to her office, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. One of Frank's new creditors, perhaps, or maybe one of Jack's surveillance team. The lines between hunters and hunted were beginning to blur. That evening, Jack called with an unexpected development. One of his contacts had managed to place a listening device in Frank and Stephanie's car. The most recent recording captured a heated phone conversation between Frank and someone identified only as Marcus. "I've got the money," But I need more time, Frank had said, his voice tense. The old man's lawyer is causing problems. The house is worth twice what I can get for it in a quick sale. Marcus's response was chilling. You've got 3 days, Harrison. After that, we're coming for our money plus interest. And we both know how we collect interest. Jack's interpretation was grim. Frank's in deeper than we thought. These aren't ordinary creditors, they're dangerous people. And they're using his real name, which means they knew who he was all along. The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor at my motel room. Stephanie stood at the door, her face pale but resolute. I found something, she said without preamble. After our talk, I started looking through Frank's things when he was out. There's a storage unit he doesn't know I know about. I found these inside. She handed me a folder containing property transfer documents for 3 different houses in 2 states. Each followed the same pattern. Elderly or vulnerable owner, sudden transfer of deed, followed by quick sale and disappearance of the proceeds. There was something else, she continued, her voice breaking. A small vial of pills, not prescription. They match what the hospital found in your system. I called Jack immediately, who arranged for the evidence to be properly documented and secured. He also insisted that Stephanie not return to the house. He knows something's wrong, she admitted. He's been watching me constantly, checking my phone. This morning he yelled at me for being 5 minutes late from the grocery store. She handed me a folder containing property transfer documents for 3 different houses in 2 states. Each followed the same pattern. Elderly or vulnerable owner, sudden transfer of deed, followed by quick sale and disappearance of the proceeds. We were reviewing financial documents when Stephanie gasped, pointing to a transaction record. He's taken out another loan against the house, she said. $300,000. And he's booked a one-way flight to Belize for next Tuesday. Jack immediately contacted his police connections to place a travel alert on Frank's passport. Susan expedited our emergency injunction request with the new evidence. Things were moving quickly now, the noose tightening around Frank's neck. What we didn't know was that Frank had hidden cameras installed throughout my house after taking possession. That night, reviewing his security footage, he discovered Stephanie removing items from his office. Our carefully orchestrated plan had just lost the element of surprise. The next 24 hours brought a whirlwind of developments. Susan's emergency injunction was granted, freezing all assets connected to my property. Jack's police contacts executed search warrants on Frank's known storage facilities, discovering additional evidence of previous frauds. The district attorney formally charged Frank with attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, and multiple counts of financial elder abuse. But Frank had vanished. When police arrived at my house to serve the arrest warrant, they found the place empty. Frank's personal belongings were gone, along with anything of value that could be quickly sold. Jack immediately dispatched his surveillance team to check known associates and possible escape routes. Stephanie was devastated but resolute. She spent hours with investigators, providing every detail she could remember about Frank's contacts, habits, and possible hideouts. She also formally filed for an annulment based on the evidence of his previous undissolved marriage. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she said during a quiet moment at Susan's apartment. "I should have seen through him. I should have protected you instead of believing his lies." I took her hand gently. "We both were fooled, Stephanie. He's been doing this for years. His entire life is a carefully constructed fraud." Later that afternoon, Jack received an alarming call from one of his surveillance team. Frank had been spotted returning to my house, appearing agitated and accompanied by 2 unidentified men. Jack immediately notified police, but by the time officers arrived, the house was empty again. What was he looking for? I wondered aloud. Stephanie's expression suddenly changed. "My God, the safe," she whispered. "Behind the painting in your bedroom. Does he know about that?" My heart sank. I never told him directly, but he might have overheard Stephanie and me discussing it. The safe contained emergency cash, Martha's jewelry, and most importantly, documents proving ownership of additional property investments, not connected to my main accounts. Assets worth approximately $200,000 that Frank might not yet have discovered. "He's desperate now," Jack said grimly. "The loan sharks are closing in, his escape plan is compromised, and he knows we're building a case against him. That makes him unpredictable and dangerous." As if confirming Jack's assessment, Stephanie's phone lit up with a text message from an unknown number. I know you took my things. You have 1 hour to bring everything back or you'll regret it. Come alone. Jack immediately began tracing the number while Susan contacted the police. But Stephanie stared at the phone, a strange calm settling over her features. He doesn't know that I know everything, she said quietly. He thinks I just stole some papers. I could go back, pretend I'm sorry, get him to reveal where he's hidden the money. Absolutely not, I said firmly. It's too dangerous. But Stephanie was already formulating a plan. We could wire me, have police nearby. He won't hurt me. He still needs me to access Dad's accounts, since some of them require in-person verification. After heated discussion, a compromise was reached. Stephanie would respond to Frank's message, agreeing to meet but at a neutral location, a coffee shop where police and Jack's team could monitor the situation. She would wear a concealed recording device and attempt to get Frank to incriminate himself further. The meeting was set for 10 o'clock the next morning. Stephanie would tell Frank she had panicked after finding the documents, but now wanted to understand his side of the story. Her performance needed to be convincing. Frank had proven himself adept at detecting deception. That night, none of us slept well. I paced Susan's guest apartment, plagued by worst-case scenarios. Was I putting my daughter in unnecessary danger? Had Frank already fled with my life savings? Would I ever recover from this betrayal? Morning arrived with unexpected news. Frank had agreed to the meeting but changed the location to a park near my house. He claimed it would be more private for their sensitive discussion. This deviation from our carefully planned scenario sent warning signals to everyone involved. We've lost the controlled environment, Jack pointed out. Too many variables, too many escape routes. Susan concurred. We should cancel, find another approach. But Stephanie remained determined. He's getting desperate. This might be our only chance to find out where he's hidden the money before he disappears for good. After further consultation with police, additional precautions were implemented. Plainclothes officers would be stationed throughout the park. Jack and I would remain in a surveillance van, with audio and visual monitoring of the meeting area. Stephanie would wear both audio and GPS tracking devices. As Stephanie prepared to leave, I embraced her tightly. Be careful. No amount of money is worth your safety. She hugged me back fiercely. I'm going to fix this, Dad. I promise. The park was unusually quiet for a weekday morning. Stephanie sat on a bench near the central fountain, her posture deliberately casual, despite the tension radiating from her. Frank appeared 10 minutes late, approaching from an unexpected direction that momentarily confused our surveillance team. Through the audio feed, we heard their conversation begin with strained pleasantries. Frank seemed agitated, constantly scanning the surroundings. Stephanie played her role perfectly, appearing contrite and confused rather than accusatory. I just want to understand what's happening, Frank, she said, her voice trembling convincingly. Dad's making all these crazy accusations, and then I found those papers in your office. Frank's response was calculated. Your father is having cognitive issues, Stephanie. The doctors warned us this might happen. He's confused and creating false memories. But the pills I found in your drawer, Stephanie persisted. They match what the hospital found in his system. Frank's tone hardened. You went through my personal medical supplies? I have a prescription for those. Sleep aids. Your father must have taken them himself and forgotten. For several minutes, the conversation continued in this vein, with Frank deflecting and minimizing each point Stephanie raised. Then, abruptly, his demeanor changed. Let's not do this here, he said, his voice dropping. I have a car waiting. We'll go somewhere private and sort everything out. Warning bells sounded in the surveillance van. Jack immediately radioed the plainclothes officers to move closer. On the audio feed, we could hear Stephanie attempting to stall. I'm comfortable talking here, Frank. It's a nice day. Frank's response chilled my blood. Either you come with me now, or I call my friends who are watching your father's motel room. Your choice. Unknown to us, Frank had somehow discovered my temporary residence and positioned associates there. The threat was clear and immediate. Without hesitation, Stephanie agreed to go with him, giving our surveillance team barely enough time to organize a pursuit. What followed was 30 minutes of carefully coordinated tracking as Frank drove Stephanie to my house, now effectively his base of operations. Police established a perimeter at a distance, while Jack and I monitored the audio feed from Stephanie's concealed device. Inside the house, Frank's pretense fell away completely. "Yes, I took your father's house and money," he admitted, his voice cold and calculating. He was an easy mark. Trusting. Isolated. Just like all the others. "Why?" Stephanie asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "We had a good life." "I loved you," Frank laughed harshly. "A good life? Middle-class mediocrity with your accountant's salary and daddy's occasional handouts?" "I had debts, Stephanie. Serious people who don't take excuses. Your father's assets were the solution. What about us? Our marriage?" "There is no us, Stephanie. There never was. The marriage isn't even legal. I needed access to your father's finances, and you were the perfect way in." The cruelty of his words hung in the air. Through the audio feed, I could hear Stephanie's breathing quicken, but her voice remained remarkably composed. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now you're going to access those investment accounts your father thinks I don't know about. The ones that require in-person verification. After that, we're done. And if I refuse?" The sound of something heavy being placed on a table came through the audio. "Then we do this the hard way." Jack immediately radioed the tactical team. "Frank's threatening Stephanie with a weapon. We need to move now." The police response was immediate but measured. Rather than a dramatic raid that might escalate the situation, they initiated a strategic approach, positioning snipers with visual access to the house interior while a negotiation team prepared to establish contact. Inside, oblivious to the gathering forces outside, Frank continued pressing Stephanie for account information, growing increasingly agitated by her deliberate stalling tactics. The audio feed captured his mounting frustration. "Stop playing games, Stephanie," he shouted. "The bank closes in 2 hours, and we need to be on a plane by tonight." "What about your friends watching Dad's motel?" Stephanie asked, buying time. "Shouldn't we wait for them?" "There are no friends at the motel," Frank snapped. It was a bluff. Now make the call to the bank. For the first time, Stephanie had caught him in a direct lie, confirming our suspicion that he was now operating alone. His previous associates either paid off or abandoned. This was valuable intelligence for the tactical team preparing to intervene. As the situation intensified inside, I made a decision that surprised even Jack. "I know another way into the house," I told him. "From my construction days. A maintenance access point in the garage that isn't on any official plans." Jack immediately relayed this information to the tactical commander, who requested my direct involvement in guiding a small entry team. Despite Susan's strenuous objections about civilian participation, the unique circumstances prevailed. Equipped with a bulletproof vest and communication device, I was escorted to a position behind my former garage, where I indicated the concealed access panel I had installed 20 years earlier during a renovation. A small team of specialized officers prepared for silent entry while the main force maintained their positions at the front of the house. Inside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Frank, sensing Stephanie's deliberate delays, had grown violent, striking her and dragging her toward the home office where my computer was located. "Last chance, Stephanie." His voice came through the audio, tight with barely controlled rage. "Access the accounts now, or this gets much worse for both you and your father." Stephanie's response was unexpectedly defiant. "My father was right about you from the beginning. You're nothing but a coward who preys on vulnerable people. You never earned anything in your life." The sound of another blow came through the audio, followed by Stephanie's cry of pain. The tactical team leader gave the signal. The operation to rescue my daughter and reclaim my home had begun. The tactical entry was executed with precision, while the main police force created a distraction at the front of the house with amplified commands and visible positioning. I led the specialized team through the hidden access point into the garage. Years of muscle memory guided my hands as I located and released the concealed panel, revealing the narrow maintenance corridor beyond. The passage emerged into a utility closet adjacent to the kitchen. Through the thin door, we could hear Frank's agitated movements in the nearby office, his voice growing increasingly threatening as he demanded Stephanie provide access to the remaining accounts. The team leader signaled for silence as we prepared for the final approach. 3 officers would secure the kitchen and living areas, while 2 others would accompany me toward the office. Every step had to be silent. The element of surprise was our only advantage against an armed and desperate man. I moved forward on instinct, navigating the home I had lived in for decades. A floorboard that creaked near the hall bathroom. The slight dip in the hallway carpet that might telegraph footsteps. These intimate details of my own house now served a purpose I could never have imagined. We were 3 steps from the office doorway when disaster struck. A text alert sounded from one of the officers' phones, a technological betrayal at the worst possible moment. Inside the office, Frank fell silent mid-sentence. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice tight with sudden alarm. The tactical team immediately shifted to rapid intervention. As they burst into the office, I remained in the hallway as instructed, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The sounds that followed were chaotic. Shouted commands, Stephanie's cry, a loud crash, then the distinctive pop of a gunshot. My daughter's scream tore through me like physical pain. Disregarding all instructions, I rushed into the office to find a scene of controlled chaos. Frank had Stephanie in front of him as a shield, a gun pressed to her temple. 2 officers had taken defensive positions behind overturned furniture, their weapons trained on Frank but unable to risk a shot. "Get back!" Frank shouted when he saw me, his eyes wild with desperation. "I'll kill her! I swear to God!" The tactical team leader attempted to take control of the situation. "Sir, you need to step outside. Let the professionals handle this." But I stood my ground, my focus entirely on Frank and my daughter. For the first time, I saw him clearly, stripped of all pretense and charm, just a cornered predator, dangerous, precisely because he had nothing left to lose. "It's over, Frank," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The house is surrounded. Your offshore accounts have been frozen. There's nowhere to go." His laugh was brittle. "Always the smart one, aren't you, Miller? Thinking you've got it all figured out." During my construction years, I had negotiated with countless difficult personalities, from temperamental architects to threatening competitors. Those skills surfaced now, guiding my approach. "You still have options," I continued calmly. "Hostage situations that end peacefully get considered during sentencing. You're looking at decades either way. But cooperating now could mean the difference between medium and maximum security." Frank's eyes darted between me and the officers, calculating his diminishing possibilities. I could almost see the thoughts racing behind his eyes, seeking any leverage, any escape route. "Here's what's going to happen," he said finally. "I want a car with a full tank of gas. Stephanie comes with me until I'm clear. Once I'm safe, I'll let her go." The tactical team leader shook his head slightly, communicating that such demands would not be met. I needed to keep Frank talking, to prevent the situation from escalating further. "Before any deal happens, I need to know my daughter is unharmed," I said. "Let me see her face." Frank adjusted his position slightly, allowing me a clearer view of Stephanie. Her left cheek was bruised, her lip split, but her eyes were clear and focused. She gave me an almost imperceptible nod, a silent communication that she was present and thinking. While maintaining eye contact with Frank, I took a small step forward. "You know what puzzles me, Frank? All this elaborate planning, the long con, gaining Stephanie's trust, working your way into my life, years of effort, and for what? To end up cornered in a house you can't actually sell, with police snipers tracking your every move?" My apparent confusion seemed to trigger something in Frank, a need to assert his intelligence, his superiority. "That's because you don't understand the big picture, old man. This house was just one piece of a much larger operation. You think too small." He was engaging, his ego providing an opening. I noticed his grip on Stephanie loosening slightly as he focused on defending his strategy to me. "Enlighten me then," I encouraged. "What was the master plan?" Frank couldn't resist the opportunity to demonstrate his cleverness. "Your house wasn't the only target. I have similar operations running in 3 other states. Different identities, different marks. This was just one branch of a much bigger enterprise." As he spoke, his attention divided between explaining his scheme and monitoring the officers. The gun drifted slightly away from Stephanie's temple. It was the moment she had been waiting for. With remarkable composure, Stephanie suddenly dropped her weight, slipping downward out of Frank's grasp. In the split second of his surprise, the tactical team surged forward. Frank raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Two officers tackled him to the ground, while another pulled Stephanie to safety. The next moments passed in a blur. Frank was secured and removed from the house while paramedics attended to Stephanie's injuries. I stood in my former office, surrounded by the wreckage of furniture and papers, trying to process the reality that the nightmare might finally be ending. Outside, additional drama unfolded as police intercepted two men approaching the house from the rear property line. They were quickly identified as associates of Frank's loan sharks, coming to collect their debt by any means necessary. Their arrival confirmed the dangerous circle that had been closing around Frank, driving his increasingly desperate actions. As Stephanie received medical attention in an ambulance parked in the driveway, I sat beside her, holding her hand in silence. The neighborhood I had known for decades had been transformed into a law enforcement zone, with police cars, evidence technicians, and curious neighbors creating a surreal tableau. With remarkable composure, Stephanie suddenly dropped her weight, slipping downward out of Frank's grasp. In the split second of his surprise, the tactical team surged forward. Frank raised his weapon, but before he could fire, two officers tackled him to the ground, while another pulled Stephanie to safety. Jack approached with updates from the arrest processing. They found significant evidence in his car, he reported. Multiple false identities, account information for at least 6 other victims, and documentation of his next targets. This wasn't just about your house and money, Miller. You interrupted what appears to be a multi-state organized fraud operation. Later, at the police station, the full scope of Frank's operation began to emerge through preliminary questioning. He had been working with a network of similar con artists, each targeting vulnerable individuals, particularly widowers and elderly homeowners. The proceeds were laundered through a series of shell companies before being divided among the criminal enterprise. Most shocking of all was the discovery that Frank had already selected his next target, an elderly widow in a neighboring county whose recently deceased husband had left her a substantial estate. The documentation in Frank's possession indicated he had already made initial contact with her through a church-based seniors group. As night fell, Stephanie and I checked into a hotel, both of us too drained to make any further decisions. Tomorrow would bring police statements, meetings with Susan about recovering assets, and the beginning of rebuilding our lives. But for now, it was enough to sit quietly together, survivors of a storm that had nearly destroyed us both. What I didn't yet know was how completely justice would eventually be served, or how this terrible experience would ultimately transform both our lives in unexpected ways. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since waking in that hospital bed, I felt a genuine sense of hope. Frank had taken my house, my money, and nearly my relationship with my daughter, but he had failed to break my spirit or my determination to right this wrong. As I finally drifted toward sleep in the unfamiliar hotel room, I realized that Frank had made a fundamental miscalculation. He had seen me as just another vulnerable old man, an easy mark to be manipulated and discarded. What he never expected was that this old man would fight back with everything he had, assembling allies and resources that would ultimately bring down not just Frank himself, but his entire criminal enterprise. The weeks following Frank's arrest unfolded in a whirlwind of legal proceedings, financial investigations, and emotional healing. The district attorney, impressed by the volume of evidence we had gathered, pursued maximum charges: attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, forgery, and organized criminal activity. Frank's previous victims from 3 states came forward, strengthening the prosecution's case and revealing the true extent of his criminal history. I'll never forget the day of Frank's arraignment. He entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, hands and feet shackled, his previously confident demeanor replaced by sullen resignation. When the judge denied bail due to flight risk and the severity of charges, Frank finally seemed to understand the gravity of his situation. That same week, Susan won an emergency judgment restoring my legal ownership of the house. The financial recovery proved more complicated. Frank had managed to transfer approximately $300,000 to offshore accounts before they were frozen. Working with federal authorities, we eventually recovered about 70% of those funds, though the process would take months of persistent effort. The second mortgage Frank had fraudulently obtained presented another challenge. After providing evidence of the forgery and fraud, the mortgage company agreed to void the loan, though the legal process was painstaking. Susan proved invaluable, navigating bureaucratic obstacles with determined efficiency. Stephanie threw herself into the recovery efforts with remarkable resolve. She took a leave of absence from her accounting firm to help organize financial documentation, meet with investigators, and support the prosecution team. Working side by side on these practical matters helped rebuild our relationship, creating a new foundation based on honesty and shared purpose. 6 weeks after the arrest, we received unexpected news. Frank, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of multiple consecutive sentences, agreed to a plea deal. In exchange for a slightly reduced sentence, he provided authorities with detailed information about his criminal network, including names, methods, and locations of ongoing operations. The prosecutor called with the news, her voice triumphant. 20 years minimum, no possibility of parole until he's served at least 16, and his cooperation has already led to 5 additional arrests across the country. You've helped break up an entire criminal enterprise, Mr. Miller. The knowledge that our ordeal might prevent others from suffering similar fates brought a profound sense of purpose to our recovery process. What had begun as a personal tragedy had evolved into something broader, a chance to protect vulnerable people we would never meet. 3 months after Frank's arrest, Stephanie and I faced a decision about the house. Though legally mine again, the memories of betrayal and violence had tainted the home where Martha and I had raised our family. After much discussion, we decided to sell and make a fresh start. The real estate market was favorable, and the house sold within 2 weeks for $865,000. After settling all outstanding legal and medical expenses, I had approximately $700,000 to rebuild my life, not including the separate investment accounts Frank had been unable to access. Stephanie's formal annulment was granted, legally erasing her marriage to Frank. The process forced her to confront difficult emotions, from embarrassment about being deceived to anger at having wasted years with a manipulative criminal. She began seeing a therapist specializing in relationship trauma, gradually working through these complex feelings. Finding new living arrangements prompted heartfelt conversations about our future. Stephanie's apartment lease was ending, and she admitted feeling unsafe, living alone after the ordeal. "Dad," she said one evening as we reviewed housing options, "what would you think about us finding a place together? Not forever, just while we're both getting back on our feet." The suggestion surprised me. "You're a grown woman with your own life, Stephanie. You don't need to babysit your old dad." She smiled, the expression reminding me so much of Martha that my heart ached. "It's not about babysitting. After everything that happened, I've realized how precious family is. We almost lost each other because of Frank. I don't want to waste any more time living like polite strangers who see each other on holidays." Her words struck a chord. Since Martha's death, I had been merely existing, going through the motions of life without true connection or purpose. Perhaps this terrible ordeal contained within it the seeds of something meaningful, a chance to rebuild not just my finances but my relationship with my only child. We found a comfortable duplex in a pleasant neighborhood across town. The arrangement provided both proximity and privacy, with separate living spaces connected by a shared garden. It was, we agreed, the perfect balance of togetherness and independence. As autumn approached, we received word that Frank's sentencing date had been set. Stephanie and I both prepared victim impact statements, a process that proved unexpectedly therapeutic. Articulating the full impact of his crimes helped clarify the path forward, distinguishing the past we couldn't change from the future we could create. In court, Frank sat impassively as I addressed the judge, describing not just the financial damage, but the profound violation of trust that had affected every aspect of my life. When I finished speaking, I looked directly at Frank for the first time since his arrest. "I came here today thinking I would feel satisfaction seeing you sentenced," I said, surprised by my own calmness. "But what I feel instead is pity. You've spent your life taking from others what you could have earned honestly with your intelligence and charm. What a waste of human potential." Stephanie's statement followed, powerful in its quiet dignity. She spoke about the psychological impact of discovering her entire marriage had been a calculated fraud, the shame and self-doubt she had battled, and her determination to create a meaningful life despite the trauma. The judge's sentence exceeded even the prosecution's recommendations. 25 years with no possibility of parole for 16, plus full restitution to all identified victims. As Frank was led away, he glanced back once, his expression unreadable. It was the last time we would ever see him. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, eager for statements about the case that had captured public attention. Initially reluctant, Stephanie and I eventually agreed to speak briefly, hoping our experience might help others recognize and avoid similar predators. The story received national coverage, prompting an unexpected development. A producer from a consumer protection program contacted us about participating in a documentary about financial crimes targeting seniors. After careful consideration, we agreed, viewing it as an opportunity to raise awareness about vulnerability and resilience in the face of sophisticated predators. Filming the documentary proved surprisingly empowering. Sharing our experience, acknowledging both the mistakes and the strengths that emerged during the crisis, helped transform the narrative from one of victimization to one of resilience and justice. As winter gave way to spring, other positive developments emerged from the ashes of our ordeal. Stephanie, whose accounting expertise had been instrumental in tracking Frank's financial maneuvers, was offered a position with a firm specializing in forensic accounting and fraud detection. The role perfectly suited her newfound passion for protecting vulnerable individuals from financial predators. Inspired by her example, I began exploring ways to contribute my own experience and knowledge. After consulting with senior advocacy groups, I developed a workshop series for retirement communities, educating seniors about recognizing and resisting manipulation techniques used by predators like Frank. The workshops quickly became popular, expanding to community centers, churches, and eventually, a regular segment on a local radio program. What had begun as a personal healing process evolved into a genuine calling, a way to transform trauma into protection for others. 1 year after Frank's arrest, Stephanie and I hosted a gathering for everyone who had helped during our darkest hours. Jack and his surveillance team, Susan and her dedicated staff, neighbor Dave who provided the crucial security footage, the detectives and prosecutors who built the case, and many others who offered support along the way. As we raised glasses in a toast of gratitude, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't experienced since before Martha's illness. The circle had closed. Justice, imperfect but substantial, had been achieved. More importantly, both Stephanie and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more authentically connected than before the crisis. Life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. Stephanie recently began dating Tom, a kind and transparent man she met through her new professional network. I found joy in mentoring young contractors and spending time with a widow's support group Martha once belonged to. Our duplex has become a genuine home, filled with new memories that gradually outnumber the painful ones. Frank's actions were calculated to destroy me, to strip away everything I had built over a lifetime of honest work. In the hospital that first morning, discovering my house and savings were gone, I thought he had succeeded. What I couldn't see then was that houses and bank accounts, while important, are ultimately replaceable. The true treasures, I've learned, are resilience, purpose, and authentic connection with others. Sometimes I think about Frank, sitting in his prison cell, surrounded by the consequences of his choices. I wonder if he ever reflects on the fundamental miscalculation he made with me. He saw an aging widower, vulnerable in his loneliness, an easy mark for a practiced predator. What he failed to recognize was the lifetime of experience, relationships, and inner strength that sustained me when everything else was taken away. His final mistake was assuming that age had diminished me, that 68 years had left me too weak or confused to fight back. Instead, those years had equipped me with precisely the wisdom, patience, and determination needed to bring him to justice. In underestimating me, Frank ensured his own downfall. Today, I no longer define myself as a victim or even a survivor. I'm simply Miller, a man who lost his way for a time but found a new path forward, surrounded by good people and meaningful work. If there's a lesson in all of this, perhaps it's that our value lies not in what we possess, but in who we are at our core, and in the communities we build around us. That's the unexpected gift, hidden within this painful journey. The discovery that even in our most vulnerable moments, we are stronger than we know, and that with the right support, we can not only recover from betrayal, but use it to create something meaningful and lasting that benefits others. In the end, that might be the most satisfying justice of all. Have you ever had to rebuild trust after a major betrayal? I'd be interested to hear your stories in the comments below, and if you found value in my experience, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with anyone who might benefit from these hard-earned lessons. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you wisdom and discernment in all your relationships.